Welcome to the deep dive. You've brought us some really interesting source material today.
Yes, it's from a YouTube video. JASNOWIDZ Krzysztof Jackowski Official is the title.
Right. And it's not your typical political commentary, is it?
Not at all. It blends, alleged clairvoyant visions with analysis of recent Polish politics, especially the elections, and what might happen next.
Okay, so our goal here isn't about saying if these visions are real or not, right?
Exactly. We're not here to verify anything. We just want to unpack what's in this specific source. What are the claims, the predictions, the concerns laid out by the speaker?
Got it. So, like, exploring a very specific viewpoint. What did the speaker claim would happen? What does he think is happening now based on his perspective and what's coming?
Precisely. And the source jumps right in with a pretty major claim about the election.
Okay, let's hear it.
The core thing is this. The speaker states, quite clearly, that before the election he predicted Trzaskowski would not become president.
Okay.
And that someone he first called Nawrocki, later specified as Karol Nawrocki, would be president. He says this prediction came true.
Right, so he's presenting that as validation from the start.
Seems that way. And the source digs into a vision the speaker apparently had back in September 2024. This was before things were really settled, candidate-wise.
And this vision was about the person who would become president?
Yes.
Yeah.
He described this figure as coming from nowhere, someone previously unknown.
Not a familiar political face, then?
No, and he specifically called him an official, not a politician.
An official. That's an interesting distinction in this context.
It feels deliberate, yeah. The vision apparently showed a very strong figure, but also a very strange person among the candidates.
How?
The source doesn't elaborate much on why strange, just that he stood out. And crucially, this figure was seen as entering the campaign with a certain plan that will have to be implemented.
A plan. Okay, that sounds potentially loaded.
It is, because according to the vision, this plan will not be Polish.
Not Polish? What does that mean?
Well, the speaker's initial feeling in the vision was that it looked like treason. And then, he says, it just felt like treason. Full stop.
Wow. Treason. That's a heavy word to attach to a potential leader based on a vision.
Extremely heavy. The vision also initially described him as somber but very specific.
Somber.
Although the speaker mentions in the source that seeing the actual president-elect, he sort of revised that, said he's not somber, but definitely very specific, and even perhaps seemingly sympathetic.
So specific, maybe sympathetic, but with this underlying treason element from the vision.
Exactly. And the vision also predicted he'd convince many people, charm many people, winning over more than 50% of voters.
Which, again, the source connects directly to Nawrocki's reported win percentage.
Right, presenting it as more proof the vision was accurate. The source also adds this candidate would mislead polls and was running with a task that he will have to fulfill.
A task. Okay, so we have this figure. Comes from nowhere, an official, has a non-Polish plan that feels like treason, looks specific, maybe sympathetic, charms voters, but is misleading and has a task. It's quite the picture.
It is. And what's really interesting in the source is how the speaker himself seems to grapple with that treason part.
How so?
Well, he explicitly states his own conflict. He looks at the president-elect, logically, and sees someone who appears sincere, open.
So his gut feeling from the vision clashes with his rational observation.
Precisely. He says the word treason doesn't seem to fit the man he sees. But because the election prediction itself turns Trzaskowski out, Nawrocki turned into body, as he puts it.
Meaning it happened in reality.
Yeah, because that part manifested. He finds the accompanying treason element deeply worrying. He feels he has to analyze what it could mean, given the vision's track record so far, according to him.
So how does the source try to interpret this feeling of treason or betraying us?
It offers a few possibilities, all apparently drawn from the vision. One idea is, maybe it's not the person himself who's treacherous.
Okay.
Maybe it's the situation, the outcome of upcoming changes, that these changes will be seen as treason or judged as treason by people later on.
So it's about perception or consequence, not necessarily deliberate betrayal by the individual.
That's one angle the source explores. Another one is very specific. The speaker says he literally felt that sentence in the vision, and it concerns cutting Poland off from Islam.
Cutting Poland off from Islam, how does that relate to treason?
The source connects it to a belief that terrible things are going to happen in parts of Europe with significant Muslim populations, and that Poland's stance on this, somehow directed by this leader, will feel like a betrayal or relate to this treason feeling.
That's a very intense and specific interpretation.
It is. And there's a third possibility mentioned.
Which is?
The treason could be in relation to the current government, like an internal political move.
You mean undermining the Tusk coalition?
Yeah, an attempt to secretly prevent the government from ruling or even cause the coalition to fall apart. Sabotage, essentially.
So the treason could be geopolitical, societal, or purely domestic political maneuvering. The source is really trying to map this powerful vision feeling onto the real world.
And you see the internal logic there, right?
Yeah.
If part A of the vision came true, what about part B, even if it seems counterintuitive?
Right. Speaking of the current government, the source also discusses the Tusk coalition and the post-election situation, linking that back to visions too.
Yes. The speaker claims his earlier visions predicted the Tusk government would run into trouble right after the elections.
And he believes that's happening now.
He says these problems are already starting.
Does the source point to specifics?
It mentions Trzaskowski calling for a technical government, calling for Tusk's resignation, things like that.
Okay, actual political elements.
Yes. And it also references reports that some political scientists are calling Tusk a political corpse. Though, importantly, the speaker presents that as something others are saying, not his own label.
But he sees these as signs that his prediction of post-election trouble is unfolding.
Exactly. And he attributes it to a specific cause. He believes there's action from the outside.
Outside Poland.
Yes, with a specific task. And that task, according to the source, is to quickly overthrow this government.
Overthrow. That's strong language. And quickly.
Yeah. The source emphasizes a feeling of great haste. It mentions a time frame, possibly 2 months or maybe by the end of the year, though he does add a caveat, that the attempt might not actually succeed.
And who does the source claim is behind this action from the outside?
It points pretty directly at the United States.
The U.S.
Yes. The speaker states the U.S. has a significant goal and that time matters, which heavily implies American involvement in trying to destabilize or remove the current Polish government quickly.
And the source doesn't just call it political maneuvering.
No, he uses the term political coup, zamach in Polish.
A coup.
He clarifies, not military, but very intelligently thought out, aimed at establishing supreme executive authority, which involves, he explains, the president and the Council of Ministers.
So, connecting back to the visions about the new president, the source seems to suggest his task might be linked to this U.S. goal and this potential political coup.
That definitely seems to be the narrative thread the source is weaving together. Yeah.
And does the source predict consequences if this coup attempt happens?
It does. Potential very serious unrest in cities, a further dividing of Poles.
Sounds destabilizing.
Very. And it suggests Poland could become, in a sense, an American colony. And significantly, that many people will consider this treason.
There's that word again. Treason, now linked to the outcome of this alleged external push.
It ties the initial vision about the president's task to this broader political drama. The source also adds a geopolitical dimension. It suggests this whole maneuver weakens Poland relative to Europe, especially Germany, that U.S. influence would increase at the expense of German influence.
So a shift in the balance of power.
And the source claims these actions would have the quiet approval of the United States?
Yeah.
Specifically, not Europe's approval.
Wow. Okay, so the source paints this picture. A rapid U.S.-backed political coup attempt to consolidate power around the president, potentially causing unrest, division, dependency, and being widely seen as treason. That's quite the scenario.
It's a very specific and dramatic narrative, yes, all interpreted through the lens of these visions.
But the source doesn't stop there, right? There were other visions mentioned?
A few other notable ones, yeah. One is the idea that the president himself might, at some point, think about abdication.
Abdication.
Or maybe just suggest resignation. It's presented as a possibility from the visions, though the speaker himself seems to doubt it'll actually happen, just something he saw.
Interesting. What else?
A really striking one is about referendums in Poland.
Referendums on what?
On geography, basically. The source describes a vision where people in at least 3 regions hold referendums to decide where they want to belong geographically.
Wait, like secession? Or joining another country? That sounds like breaking Poland apart.
The speaker connects it directly to a potential division of Poland, or maybe a controlled partition with our consent.
A controlled partition? That's alarming. And who does the source suggest is behind this idea?
This is where it gets a bit strange within the source's own narrative. He says this idea seems to flow from Tusk.
From Tusk, but the source just said Tusk was the target of a coup attempt.
Exactly. It's a contradiction he notes himself. Why would the target of the coup also be the source of an idea to partition the country? It highlights how these visions, as presented, can be complex and sometimes conflicting.
Yeah, that doesn't immediately compute, but the source presents it anyway.
As a possibility emerging from the political dynamics, regardless of the internal logic. It's part of the overall turbulent picture he sees.
So, bringing all these threads together, the election, the treason, the coup attempt, the potential division, what's the source's big picture view of Poland's situation?
He frames Poland as being perpetually caught, pulled between two external world influences. He literally calls them two world influences.
Neither of them Polish.
Neither purely Polish, no.
Yeah.
He uses this phrase, that they're cut to us like leeches.
Oof, that's vivid.
It is. And he believes that ambitious Polish politicians, they do not have the power to change anything fundamentally because these external forces are too strong. He also throws in that classic line about media control. Whoever has the media rules.
So a sense of powerlessness domestically against larger forces.
Yeah, and this leads him to a pretty bleak conclusion about Poland's recent history.
Which is?
He says Poles are living and have been living for decades since communism fell in a state of two treasons.
Two treasons, meaning caught between these two external influences, both betraying Polish interests in some way?
That seems to be the idea. The Poles allowed themselves to get divided, and this division is actively cultivated by these outside powers.
Wow.
He even mentions his own voting choice in the second round wasn't about policy, but just looking at the candidates' faces, because he felt neither option offered an escape from this potential treason.
So this source essentially presents a narrative where everything, the election, the new president, the political fighting, future anxieties, it's all part of this larger long-term drama of external manipulation, internal division, and betrayal viewed through these alleged visions.
It's a very unique, very personal interpretation. It weaves together real people and events with these extraordinary claims into one consistent, if unsettling, worldview.
And it's interesting how, whether you believe in the visions or not, the source definitely taps into real anxieties people have, doesn't it? Worries about stability, foreign influence, national sovereignty, internal splits.
Absolutely. Those are palpable concerns. This source just offers a very specific and unconventional framework for understanding them, the different kind of map for navigating anxieties about power in the future.
It takes all this complexity and tries to find an underlying pattern driven by tasks, external forces, and this recurring theme of betrayal.
Right. It's searching for meaning in a way that goes beyond standard political analysis.
So for you, the listener, what does this deep dive into this specific source offer?
Well, it gives you a glimpse into one particular narrative that interprets politics through visions and this deep concern about betrayal and outside control. It's a distinct perspective, often quite dark, asking you to look at familiar events in a totally different way.
We've covered the source's claim about the election prediction coming true, the really disturbing vision about the new president's task and potential treason.
We looked at the interpretation of a fast-moving, externally driven political play, maybe political coup happening right now, according to the source.
And those broader visions, too, the potential for referendums, division, and this overall idea of Poland caught in two treasons by outside powers.
It's a dense, complex picture, all drawn from this one particular YouTube source.
And maybe here's a final thought for you to take away, reflecting on how this source operates. When we're faced with complex political events and competing stories about what's really going on, how does a perspective like this one that blends political observation with claims of visions and hidden agendas, how does that shape our understanding of power, influence, and what the future might actually hold?